Oh, hey everybody, welcome back. This is really excellent. I'm excited because this is a rare opportunity where I'm interviewing someone who's been interviewed a lot. so, um, not nervous at all. Great guy. I'm excited to share his story with you. But it's a way to celebrate 8 years of publishing this podcast. So, without any further delay, let me introduce this week's guest. Today's guest has interviewed over 1,000 top CEOs, unveiling timeless leadership principles and transforming them into actionable insights. As the founder and CEO of the CEO Forum Group, he's not just a host, but a visionary who pioneered the term the transformative CEO. His nationally syndicated radio show, The CEO Show, reaches over 600,000 listeners weekly across 62 stations, earning its place as the #1 podcast for CEOs in America. He's a Forbes, Fortune, and CNBC writer with over 350 articles dedicated to transformative CEOs, women leadership, customer experience, culture, and digital transformation. He's co-author of The Transformative CEO, which inspired a documentary series. His work has been featured on Squawk Box and acknowledged by Harvard Business Review for his expertise in executive communications. I have the pleasure of producing the Transformative CEO virtual summits 4 times a year, and have enjoyed sharing his events with my network. I love his philosophy that everyone should have access to success. Please join me in welcoming Robert Reiss. Welcome, Robert.
Well, a pleasure to be with you, Robbie, and always good to see you.
And thanks to technology, you are joining me from Connecticut. And as you know, this is a show about building strong networks. And the context, though, is leadership. So tell me, how do you define leadership?
It came to me after interviewing about 1,000 of those CEOs that leadership can be boiled down into just 6 words. Those 6 words are to get from here to there. So a CEO's job is to define their vision, current reality, and then the gap to get there.
To get from here to there. That is a very, I love how you like funneled that down into simplistic terms we can all remember. Tell me a little bit about your earliest sort of experiences with leadership. When did you realize you had the skills to lead?
I'm still learning. I'm a complete student, but I would say I guess I learned when I started leading people and people started following me. That's when I
Mm.
mostly learned.
What were some of those earlier times? Like, I'm always curious, Robert, when I get someone on here, a lot of times their first story is in grad school or their earliest times in a career, or like the first time they got maybe promoted. But I was curious, like, what you're like as a kid. When you were on the playground, did you like organize your friends or sit back? Did you have teachers who noticed you and kept asking you to do more? Did you like, were you the first to raise your hand? Did they leave you in charge when they left the room? Did you run for student office or like organize like something for a student group? I don't know. Robert, what were you like as a kid?
I was the opposite. I was not a leader at all, and I will say I had dyslexia as a kid, and what that did is it made me a super slow reader. So I was never the best student. I was always really shy, but I learned from dyslexia. It took me years and years to understand that that was the greatest skill that I had, having dyslexia. But basically, I was always in the background. I was never in the leadership role. But I did read a book when I was about 20 years old, and that book was Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. And the story and the premise is really where this writer, Napoleon Hill, is brought in by a guy named Andrew Carnegie in 1907. And Andrew Carnegie was the richest man in the world and said, I want you to interview the top people in the world and understand what success is and how success works. And based on that, I was just so inspired, and it brought something out in me saying, wow, this is amazing what he's done. Now, I never realized that 2 decades or later, I would actually be doing the same job that he had been done. But I think that put a seed in me.
What led you at 20 to even be reading that book? Was there somebody who handed it to you?
Yeah, it was actually my grandfather. So my grandpa, he was always like a mentor to me, and he had taken the Dale Carnegie course with Dale Carnegie himself when he was young. So he actually, when he was a young lawyer, it pulled his whole life together, and he gave me this book as well. He said, "Well, now that you read the Dale Carnegie book, read this one." And one thing interesting I'll mention, when I was just 5 years old, I had this indelible memory with him. We're sitting around the kitchen table, and he says, "Robbie, my boy, what's the most important word in the English language?" And 5 years old, I don't know. And then he says, "Reliability." And then he says, "Let's open up the dictionary." We take out a dictionary, and he says, "Find it." So I'm like looking, RUL, I don't know how to spell. But we found it, and together we read what it meant. And to that day, everything I've done has been based on reliability. As a matter of fact, interviewing all these CEOs, everyone has like 4 or 5 different values. Our company only has 2 values. One is family first, just because that's so important. But the number one core value that we have in our whole company is we keep promises. And that goes back to my grandpa, who taught me that when I was 5 years old.
I have this saying, I'm really good at saying no. For the last decade, I just joined a board of a local chapter for the National Speakers Association, but I've been in the group for 9.5 years, and I was asked to join the very first time I attended a different chapter, but I was asked to join. And I'm a person who shows up big, and I bring a lot of energy. They're like, "Oh my God, you." But I'm really good at saying no. But I do say, you can always ask me to do something. And if I can do it, I will say yes, and I will do it without you having to remind me. I may not be able to take on the entire board role, but I will be there for the thing you need me to do. If I can do it, I will do it, and you don't have to chase me for it. And it's like that reliability. Like, I will promise you, and then and I won't feel bad about saying no. Like, you can ask me 9 times. If I only do 2 things a year, like, you'll be really happy that I actually did them, and I won't feel bad about the 7 I had to say no to, because I'll know you'll keep asking. So I just feel like that's the relationships that I've built. And when I had time, I'm now committing a bigger role. But I love this idea of just boiling it down to the word reliability, because that, I always said, this is how you make people like you. You only say yes to things you can do, and you do them.
I mean, imagine a contractor saying, "I'll be there on Tuesday at 4," and they're there Tuesday at 4. You're like, "Oh my goodness, they're great." But Robbie, that's the very reason everyone in our culture is like that. Why do you think I wanted you? I reached out to you and found out about you from Terry Jones, who was the founder of Travelocity and of Kayak. He told me all about you, and in meeting you, that's the very skill that I saw in you. That everything you say you'll do, you always do it, period. And you always go above and beyond, and you take the leadership role. So that's a characteristic I value greatly.
I appreciate this, and I love that you had this opportunity with your grandfather to be introduced to these great, I'm gonna call them philosophers. I mean, they really like spelled things out for how we should all show up and behave in the world, to make better friends. So when you're really young, it sounds like dyslexia originally, was it diagnosed right away, or did it take you a while to even?
No. My mom doesn't even believe that I have it.
Oh, so you
But
just
I
spend a
leave.
lot of time struggling in school,
But you know what? No one knew what it was.
right?
It wasn't. But thank God I didn't know, because it forced me to solve problems. It forced me to have incredible confidence, where I built a whole company just by cold calling. All I would do nonstop is cold calling, and you get a zillion no's, but on the a zillion and one, you get a yes.
I had someone on my show talking about how, because of their dyslexia, they would ask a lot of questions during discussions in order to learn more about what the book was about. So because I think they watched the movie version, but they knew the book had more, so they'd ask lots of questions, and they got really good at asking follow-up questions and retaining that, and then using that to answer tests and stuff. So there are tell me some of the secret superpowers that you've developed as a person who, wasn't you weren't able to read the way everyone else did. You had to come up with other ways of sort of persevering. So what are some of the superpowers?
What one thing that I could say is about 4 years into work, maybe 8 years, I don't know. I had this long commute, and I have a philosophy that every negative hidden beneath it is an even greater treasure. What I realized after years of doing this commute, I said, you know what? What if I spent this time reading one business book a week? Now I'm on the train an hour and a half each way, and I read some sports books, but there's no way I could read like a business book, a real book. It was just too hard because I read one word at a time really slowly. But I forced myself after about a year and a half. I guess I'd read maybe like 75 business books. I would then go into someone's office. First thing I'd do is I'd look up at the wall. I'd know all the books. I'd know all the theories. And we started talking about it. And that just jump started me with CEOs because I could talk at a higher level. I could never get a middle level job, but I could talk at the highest level. I'll tell you, someone with dyslexia was John Chambers, who built Cisco from 100 million to $47 billion. And I read his book when I was interviewing him, and he talked about how he had dyslexia. And it's like, I think page 57, it all of a sudden came to me, and I'm speaking with him and I say, while I'm on the air was the first time, this was maybe about 6 years ago, I admitted, because I was so embarrassed about having dyslexia. And he said, Robert, it is the greatest strength. And I said, what do you mean? It's the worst thing ever. You're slow at this. People give you instructions, ask you to watch a video. You get step 3 and 6 all mixed up and confused. It's terrible. He said, no, you think differently. You think the way I do. You think A, B, Z. You see the end of the movie way before anyone else does. So when you talk about someone's vision, you know what it is. And he said, that's why you connect with people like me, with CEOs. He said, I'm telling you, 1 out of 5 of us is dyslexic also. None of us just talk about it.
I love this term. Recently has been coming around, neurospicy, all the people who show up a little differently in the world. It's like a way to reclaim this idea.
It's the ultimate, and it's the ultimate. I am so big about diversity that you need to reach out. You need to include everyone. But you know what the ultimate diversity is? Mental illness. People with mental illness, I'm looking to find someone great to hire on my team with mental illness, because they just think totally differently, and they're going to come up with ideas that you never had. I mean, think about how many people with autism are absolutely incredible and brilliant. They think differently and they get it. And also they have more confidence than anyone because they've gone through the challenges.
Yeah, I think that seeing in other people their brilliance is another superpower of yours. I want to just wind back the clock a little bit again. When you were 12, Robert, what did you think you were going to be when you grew up? Was there a clear path forward? Was there expectations you were going to go to college? Was there a family business to go into or something? Like, what was sort of the where I'd be in 10 years kind of plan?
There was nothing, and I never thought about that at 12. I knew I was going to go to college, but that's as far. But I said, oh my gosh, more school, that's terrible. But I thought back in those days, colleges, you drink some beer or something, it's fun. But I will say my life changed when I was this was right around the time, I think this was, I don't remember if it was before or after I read that book. It might have been after I read that book. It was on a Christmas break. My appendix burst. And for 2 nights, I was having the same dream that I was a piece of modern art, Robbie, and people were shaping me. That was my dream. And I'd wake up, and on Christmas Day, fortunately, my grandmother was trying to feed me food. And I'm like, I can't eat anything. They said if I ate anything, I would have died. But what happened was my uncle Brooks, he got me to go to the hospital. So I go to the hospital, and I wake up at a point, and I'm lying down, and I said to myself, this was in the hospital, I said, I see all these people around, like just lying down. I said, crap, I'm dead. I can't believe it. The worst thing that could have happened to me, I was really feeling like I'm whatever, if I was 21 or something, I'm dead. I've died already, and I never got to really live my life. And so then I said, wait, I'm going to do a test. I'm going to scream out at the top of my lungs to a nurse. And I screamed out, hello, hello. And no one responded. Now, of course, my hello was like, hello. I had no strength or anything. But then when she came over, I realized that there was like a God-given purpose that I've got to do something with my life. And I think that was the trigger. So at 12, I'm sorry to say I have no good answers for you, but in my early 20s, it occurred and I had a seed and it was like, God has a path for you, man. Go for it. And then I knew, and it was in the back of my mind, this Napoleon Hill, but I never thought of it for 2 decades. But I guess that's how everything works. And all of a sudden you end up where you're supposed to be.
What did you initially go into after this big epiphany? Did you have a job that you were?
You know what I majored in? I majored in at Michigan State, environmental studies. Why? I love trees. I grew up in New York City. I thought the environment is so cool. To this day, I still love trees. So that's what I majored in. I've never been able to do anything with it though.
So you didn't become a forest ranger or anything like that?
No. Everyone would say, "Yeah, what are you going to do with it?"
What do you do with that? So what did you do? What's the career path that you initially had right out of college?
You know, it's interesting, Robbie, because I'm always interviewing people and I'm never interviewed. Especially, they're always interviewing me about what have you learned from this CEO or that CEO or another. No one ever does about me. So this is my first time at this, really. And um, I went into public relations as my first job. I couldn't really do it because I didn't know how to write. I couldn't write a letter, but I self-taught myself everything. And then I took a Dale Carnegie course and I loved it. And after I really floundered for a few years. And then like I met my wife and Barbara just sort of gelled everything for me because she was so stable, in everything. And she had an amazing dad, Jack. So
And then
it's just,
where did you end up? I mean, I know you as this person who's really incredibly well connected. So, and I know that at some point you started reading these books, but what was the job you were commuting back and forth to do? Because that wasn't anything
I
related to.
started working after I took the Dale Carnegie class, I started working for Dale Carnegie. I
Oh,
was in
wow.
sales, I was an instructor. I've instructed thousands of people actually, and I became really good, believe it or not, at public speaking. I used to do speeches, get paid a lot of money for it. I don't do them anymore,
That's
but
really cool. I mean, so I think my first book is about networking, croissants versus bagels, strategic, effective, and
yes,
inclusive networking at conferences. And I spent more than a decade before the pandemic speaking about networking at events and how to create inclusive experiences, engaging experiences. I'm still doing it both virtually and in person, but it is really interesting to have that kind of training and that experience, but also there's something happens when you start teaching something, you learn a lot. Like you're kind of good at something, and then when you're teaching it, like, oh, well, there's steps that I'm actually going to teach. So you get better at it as well. So that explains a lot to me about why you're really good at relationships, because you've got this really strong foundation on how to build relationships. When you said earlier, the what is the best word in the world? I thought you were going to say the person's name, because of course that's drilled into my head that their
that's
name is their favorite word. But
that's in Dale Carnegie. That's principle number 6. Is
yeah,
the
yeah.
person's
So
name is
this
the
is where
sweetest sound in any language. Yeah.
So, that I mean, incredible skills. Who were you meeting then? Was that the beginning of you building this network? Was that when
Well,
you starting introduced?
yeah, I started building the network, but I always go back to principles. I'm curious and I'm loyal. Those are my 2 biggest characteristics. Oh, and I'm hardworking. My goal, believe it or not, I usually wake up at 3 or 4 in the morning. Today I was up at like 2 in the morning, but I'm excited because my daughter's coming home from Italy and I haven't seen her in 6 months. Um, but my goal used to be by 9 a.m. I want to accomplish more than most people have accomplished in a whole day. And if you do nonstop cold calling, nonstop outreach, you create everything. But there is a lesson I learned about networking. if you want to know what that was.
Sure.
And that was back in the early 20s again. And these are all a blur. I don't remember which happened first, second, third. But someone I knew named Michael said, oh, I know this guy, Henry Baker. He's 96 years old, and he's the most iconic real estate person in the world. He would sell buildings, but he sold like the Empire State Building, stuff like that. And I got to meet him. And when I went in, he's this old guy, and he's on the phone crushing. What's the rent roll? Too expensive. Forget it. Like that, a real curmudgeon. But I said to him, you've accomplished so much, and real estate is all relationships. Is there any one principle, any one secret? And he said it like this. He said, young man, never burn a bridge. And I've kept that in life. When I first started the CEO show and interviewing CEOs, I didn't know anyone, but I had two plans. Number one, I would always respect I would honor every relationship, always. And the second is I just keep aggregating content. Now we have the world's largest CEO content library of in-depth discussions in leadership. But that was my whole plan when I went. But meeting people, networking is the key to everything. It's exactly how I built everything.
What year did you get started with the CEO show?
It was Friday, the 13th of April, 2007.
Wow. And was it a podcast or a radio show?
Yeah, it was a radio show. It was out of Greenwich, Connecticut. And so what happened before there, you asked about my background. So I worked for Dale Carnegie. After working for Dale Carnegie, doing really well, the global CEO of Dale Carnegie, Stuart Levine, asked me to join his company. And I frankly learned a huge amount about how CEOs think from him. And so that was my whole career. I did nothing, a little, public relations. Then I joined Dale Carnegie, 7-8 years. Then I worked for him for 7-8 years. And then I just knew it was time to spread my wings. And can I tell you how I knew? I was on a commute home from, do you know where the LIE Long Island Expressway is?
I grew up on Long Island.
You did? I didn't know that. So where did you grow up?
Ronkonkoma.
Oh, real? Wow.
End of the train line.
You at the big train station there.
Yep.
So the LIE is crowded like crazy. So I'm driving back, and I didn't learn my lesson. First, I had the long train commute, but now I did it even worse. I did driving to Long Island, and driving commute is worse because in those days there was no Sirius radio, no nothing. So I'm stuck bumper to bumper, like exit 40 on the LIE in traffic. And I'm like, where's there something I could learn from people, about success and everything? And there's nowhere. And I kept looking, and I said, CEOs understand two things: personal success and business models. I said, what if I started interviewing CEOs? It would be so much fun. I could ask whatever I wanted. And right there on that crazy commute, that seed came in my head. And then I said, you know what? I have a fantastic job. Loved it. Was doing tremendously successful. I had young kids, but at 45, I gave it all up. I'm like, my wife thought I was crazy. She still might now. She's pretty happy. But I gave it all up. And I said, I am going to start interviewing CEOs. And then I searched around, and WGCH out of Greenwich, Connecticut, they said, yeah, we'll give you a radio show. And I'm like, okay, but now I don't really know any CEOs. I don't know anyone. I don't know anything about radio, anything. I've got to figure out how to do this. But I had it set up for that date you mentioned, Friday, the 13th of April, 2007. And then, well, I'm talking too much. You go ahead.
No, you're great. I'm trying to play catch up in my brain because I was following you until you said, and then I left my job because I'm with your wife.
You gotta, my wife was at home with the kids, but I said, I believe in it. I had that seed in my heart that I guess happened when my appendix came out. I said, God has a plan for me. I've got to do it. And I just went and said, I'm going to go for it. And I said,
My mentor said to me, Dory Clark had said to me at one point, you'll know it's time to quit your day job when it gets in the way of your business. And so
ooh, I love that.
I really follow that. I follow that advice. When you're like, build it up, and you're like, oh, this job, this job, I got to get rid of it. I got a business to go. But you didn't have the next, the next rung on the ladder was still pretty far up for you. You were scrambling to figure out how to reach it. You had an idea, you had a really good idea, and you had passion. But finding the networking your way into the radio show option was great. So you had a base, and also gave you some authority, because not everyone has access to a radio show. But landing those first few CEOs, I know when my show got started, I initially interviewed people local that I knew. I mean, they were leaders, but they were local leaders. But then I went to a conference and I walked away with 12 people I could interview who were,
You got 12?
The National Speakers Association, everyone was willing to say
everyone.
yes. But I actually was like, no, they have to have spoken on the main stage, be a past president of the National Association, or have $1 million business was my criteria, when I realized everyone would say yes. And 12 people said yes, and 10 booked right away. And that elevated the show, because people then knew other people who were on the show. And it got a lot easier over time to reach out. But when you're starting from I have an idea, but like, who were the first few people who said yes to you? And how did you, I'm going to say, ladder up to the next level CEO? I mean, the people you bring in are top 50, Forbes 500 people to the summit. So, how did you initially get into these circles?
Like most people did, it's like a mistake. And so what happened was but I always had an open mind. So someone said to me, Robert, we're having this, it's called Mormon and Breakfast. It's a meeting, and we're going to listen to Mormon speakers. And I'm not a Latter-day Saint. And but I said, okay, I'll go. It's a New Canaan. So I went there, and the first speaker was David Neilman. He founded JetBlue. And I want to tell you, Latter-day Saints probably work harder than anyone I've ever met. It's so focused, because they have to take 2-year missionary of just cold calling, and And so while I was there, I went up to him, and now the radio show in Greenwich said, "Oh, we want you to start this Friday, 4 to 5 p.m." I said, "I can't. I don't know any CEOs. I don't know what I'm going to do." So I went there and I asked him. I said, "Hey, I'm going to start a show." And he said, "Oh, what's the show?" And I said, "Oh, the CEO show." And it just like popped, and the CEO show. And I said, "I want to talk with people who have amazing customer models. Would you be on the show?" And he said, "Well, sure. Call up. Here's Carol Archer. I still remember her name. Here's her, and just be on the show." So then I had my first person. Then
What an
I said,
amazing first person, Robert. I mean, to come
she
out of the
was
gate with
phenomenal.
unbelievable. Um,
But
so,
wait, it
so
happened
yeah, go ahead.
at the, or unless, do you have something? Or
No,
so
go ahead.
at that meeting, then I looked and I see Jim Quigley, who's the CEO of Deloitte. So I go up to him and I said, "Jim Quigley, you don't know me, but I'm starting a radio show." He goes, "Oh, okay." I said, "And by the way, David Neilman's going to be on the show." He said, "He is?" I said, "Yes, I'd like to interview you." So Jim said, "Sure." So that now I had a second one. Now I had no idea where to go, but I did these interviews and I'd look around. I remember one day looking in the bathroom and my wife had this perfume Allure. I said, "Well, who makes that?" She goes, "Oh, that's Clinique." And I said, "Wait, Clinique, they're owned by Estee Lauder." So I just cold called William Lauder. And it's like, "Well, who's on the show?" I said, "Well, David Neilman, the founder of Deloitte." And then he came on. Then someone else I was speaking with, they're saying, "I just went to Ritz-Carlton. It is the best hotel." So I said, "Really? You're right. I need to get the Ritz-Carlton on the show." So I call up, and then Simon Cooper, the president of the Ritz-Carlton, comes up, and it's the same thing. Now I had 3 or 4, and every week I'd make a list of the person, their name, and the secret that I did is I would only interview top people. And because of that, after I'd done like 7 or 8, everyone would look at the list And they'd be like, oh, yeah, yeah, that's what you do. It's like you're in the golf club, right? So now everyone came. And then what happened was the radio show comes to me, the station, and they say, you know what, Robert? Um, your show is really popular, and we think you should go national. And I'm like, well, what do you mean national? How does that work? They said, well, there's 13,000 radio stations. There's a standard clock on AM, FM radio, and everyone is the same. Like the first 5 minutes are local news and sports. Then it's 8 minutes, 20 seconds. Then it's avails, or what they call commercials, for 4 minutes. Then it's 9 minutes, 40 seconds of more content. And so all of a sudden I became a nationally syndicated show. And I wanted someone great for the kickoff of that. So I mean, I was shopping at a Home Depot, and I said, wait, what about Bernie Marcus, the founder of the Home Depot? He founded this whole thing. And so I reached out to him and said, hey, I want you to be on the show. And he said, sure. It's amazing when you reach out to CEOs, they are open because they have so much they want to share. And to this day, can I tell you one thing that I learned from Bernie Marcus? He said, Robert, if someone comes to your house and you don't offer them a donut, a cup of coffee, a cup of water, what kind of person are you? To this day, the guys come mow our lawn and I'm bringing them a cup of coffee. They're like, wow, why are you doing that? But it's all from Bernie Marcus.
I mean, I'm sure you learned a lot from interviewing all these people. I love hearing the origin story of those first scrappy few months when you were getting going and how serendipity. I mean, I always say serendipity is more likely to happen if you know what you're looking for. You knew what you were looking for. And so the opportunities started to present themselves. But then you also had the chutzpah to follow through on that and actually make the request. You'd not interviewed anyone. You didn't actually have a show yet. You didn't even have a name of the show. You're making it up on the go, but you're like, this is the thing. And, you know, as I said to you off air, judge me on my last 3 attempts, never my first 3 attempts. Cause you know, you only get better at interviewing or any skill like that. So it's cool that you made a decision to focus on the top. And I think a lot of people listening here, they try to get there, but they try through 8 other rungs in the ladder. You were like, nope, we're going to go right to the top. I'm not going to go through all the ranks. I'm going to just jump there. But then you were invited into the golf course. Essentially, you were suddenly part of the country club because it's a given. People are going to want to be in your show because you're going to help shine their light. You're really helping them look great. And I want to give a shout out, actually, Robert, to your CEO, the Transformative CEO Summit, because I've been sharing that now a few times with my network. I'm going to keep doing that. But you have this event 4 times a year. You have keynotes from a handful of top CEOs. And then there are 4 or 5, maybe even 6 panels for people to choose from, all virtual. And you get to listen in. I always tell people when I'm promoting it, it's like getting to be a fly on the wall because it's so rare to hear these high level CEOs of companies and brands that we would recognize have conversations with each other about innovation or customer service or whatever the experience is that we're having them discuss. And then whether you agree or disagree, that's not even the point. It's more that you're finding out what they believe, and it's not being filtered through their PR company or their marketing company. It's their beliefs. And that is so helpful. So I have a ton of friends in the executive coaching world, and they're so excited because it's something that they're really trying to figure out, like what's happening in these minds. And it's really great to hear all that. I've been getting tons of compliments from people and people thanking me for letting them know about this experience. And I don't know if you've seen it, but a lot of them have written up their experience and posted it on social. They're posting it on LinkedIn. So you've got this like best kept secret. I feel like you should have thousands of people joining that every single time. And I'm here to help make that happen because I think you're creating such incredible content. Your team has landed so many amazing CEOs, and a lot of them repeat. I've noticed you're really good at the relationship building because they're willing to come back and circle back through. So how did you get the idea to create that, which is a little different? It's not a radio show. You know, there's different formats you've developed. So when did this go from a radio show to you creating this whole, organization around it? Now you've got a team. When did that shift start to happen?
That started because I always wanted more. I always wanted to share success. My mission was disseminate CEO wisdom to elevate business, the economy, society. I don't care if CEO does something bad, but it's so I just wanted more. So every opportunity, everywhere I'd go, I would look deductively. You know, you could look inductively where you know the end. I just open up and see what moved. So first I started writing for Forbes, and that really helped me and gave me. And Steve Forbes actually said, you know, my grandfather, when he started the company, we used to call the CEO the head knocker. I want you to be our specialist on writing about head knockers. So then I had Forbes. Then the conference board, they had all these events, and they said you could get speakers. So I got these speakers, and the first year I did it, we were cited as the #1 marketing conference globally. We're like ahead of Davos and everything, because all I got is like the most phenomenal speakers, and just got them, you know, because there were people I interviewed on the radio. Then we started a magazine, but the origin of the summit, it happened because it was one day I was sitting at my office table, and this is my grandfather's table from while he was alive as a lawyer that I sit at, you know, the one who told me reliability. And I'm drinking coffee, and this was in like September of 2020. And I said, you know what? The world it's crazy. It's like 1918 with the pandemic, 1929 with the stock market, and 1968 with race riots. We are in the worst shape ever. This is horrible where we are. And I said, you know what though? CEOs have solutions. They're natural problem solvers. So they started, I said, what if I started like, I always did face-to-face meetings. I've done like hundreds of like private CEO dinners and all this. I said, what if I did something via Zoom? Because that's all anyone did then. And I started, and the first one that I did was like such an enormous success. People like, this is the best ever. We want to meet these CEOs. We want to hear behind the scenes. And you mentioned executive coaches. I've a number of friends who are executive coaches. I could never do it because of my dyslexia. I couldn't pull the stuff together. I never would have the right advice. So I know a lot of the answers from CEOs, but training someone is so hard. But so these executive coaches, they're the ones, every CEO, really good one, has like 6 executive coaches who teach them on different things. And that's the one who are making the CEOs better and become who they should become. And that's what's elevating business, the economy, and society. So it all pulls together in this beautiful package of connecting CEOs, getting executive coaches to learn. They end up in turn training the CEOs to be better and to do what they should be doing. So it's a great circle of life.
I wanted to share briefly a little more about how you and I connected, because it's another one of those stories about networking. Because you mentioned earlier, Terry Jones connected us. He's a member of the National Speakers Association. When everything went on Zoom, I became known as a Zoom guy. He built out an incredible home studio. I've seen photos. And to this day, I joke about, you know, if you're the kind of speaker who's done that, you probably have a hair light, green screen, you know, the clicker, you got everything. And if you didn't go that way, work with me. Like, I'm the person who elevates you. When you bought a lot of equipment and didn't plug it in, that's probably more my client. But he was doing so much in the world of virtual, building on a home studio. We were having conversations about things. So he understood what I was able to do. And I knew him because I'd had him on my show, because I met him at a conference, right? So like building relationships, sustaining relationships over time. He has his own incredible story. You know, you were talking about some CEOs. I had Howard Putnam on my show, former CEO of Southwest Airlines. I heard his story. Someone was sharing it from the stage at NSA. And then there was a book of his in the back of the room. And I realized he might be at the conference. So I found him on LinkedIn, told him I was at the event, asked if we could meet in the hallway, and we did. And then he said yes to be on my show. So it's like all these little moments for me. I love how you have sort of shot to the top and bring people together. As we're shifting gears a little bit here, though, Robert, I wanted to know, I mean, you've amassed an amazing network. It is incredible. And I know you think of these as individual people. You're not just looking at their titles. You're thinking about them and who they are, personalities, their relationships to you. So you have that inner circle of people that you know you're going to stay in touch with. But then there's always sort of a second or third layer or tier out, the people you see once a year at a conference, people you worked with 5 years ago, but you haven't had a reason to since. You like each other. That's very important. So how do you think about staying in touch and nurturing those sort of weaker ties, those connections you don't see all the time, but you enjoy each other? What kind of habits, philosophies, practices?
Well, you got to be a miracle to other people. You have to say whatever they need. You think about it. Now, it's been proven you could only have 80 real relationships. So I know, let's say I know personally about 500 CEOs. I could just pick up the phone or email them, and we're now connecting. But you have to do something special, and it has to be genuine and authentic. Like, let's say someone's daughter is doing something amazing but doesn't have a job. Well, maybe you help them get a job, or maybe you counsel them, or maybe that their business wants to grow in this one area to another. You introduce them to the person. Now, I could tell you, if I made like 100 basis points in every introduction I made, I brought in several $1 billion already of business. But really, the only reason I'm doing it, I'm not getting money. It's the right thing to do. If you do the right thing, you keep doing genuine favors, and trying to never overstep your bounds. I mean, you really have to care about people deeply in your heart, genuinely. That I probably learned from my mom.
Say more about that.
Yeah, but I do want to tell you, because I don't know when this ends or not. But you mentioned Southwest Airlines,
Mm-hmm.
and I want to end on, it's like about a 2-minute story, because the first person I ever really met as a CEO was the founder of Southwest Airlines, Herb Kelleher. And this is a decade before I was doing the CEO show interviews.
Yeah, I'd love to hear it.
Okay, so I'm at a black tie event, and we're wearing tuxedos, and I see Herb Kelleher, and I mean, everyone knew who he was. He started this iconic company, was the most successful airline company, always financially successful, the best customer service, the best culture, and he did everything differently than everyone. So I just went up to him, and at that time, I said, "I'm Robert Reiss. You don't know me, but I'm a real student of what makes a company great. And I've been reading one business book a week for already a few years then. I mean, my favorite one back then was Built to Last by Jim Collins. That's even way better than Good to Great. By the way, one little secret, I would buy a book and I would send it with an inscribed something to it to a CEO, and they would love it. And all of a sudden, then when I'd call for an interview or something, they'll read, "Oh, he received your book. Thank you so much." So anyway, I go up to him and I said, "You don't know me, but I really want to know, I'm a student, what makes a company great?" He says, "Well, it's not what you pay for fuel. It's not how quickly you turn around the plane. It's when you're in the elevator and you see Mary Jo and you say, how was Patricia's soccer game this weekend?" So I said, "Oh, it's communication." And he goes to me, "Communication?" He said, "It's love." And so at that point, the song, you remember Tina Turner had "What's Love Got to Do with It?" bouncing through my brain. So I probably made a highly articulate comment like, "Aw." And then he said something that I believe changed my life. He said, "Love, unleashing the spirit of the individual." And I was so wowed with that. I said, "Well, thank you, Mr. Kelleher." And I just I wrote it down. And at that point, I may have been managing 3 people or something. I tried to unleash their spirit individually. Then I looked at organizations. I said, organizations have their own spirit. I'm going to unleash that. And my whole life became about that. And now, if you notice, every person in my company, you could tell what I talk with them about is, my goal is to unleash your spirit. Because if I unleash your spirit, you're going to be doing what you're meant to do. and our company is going to benefit and society is going to benefit. And I think here is the funny hidden message here, Robbie, is that somewhere in the back of my mind, I realized the power of one conversation with the CEO, how it could change your entire perspective and your entire life. And maybe that was in my subconscious, along with Napoleon Hill's book, along with being reliable, along with Henry Baker saying, never burn a bridge. And maybe that's where, I decided all of a sudden, I was in that car on the LIE and I said, okay, let's start interviewing CEOs.
I love the story. I love how you're now looking back and weaving all this together. It also, for anyone who's out there who has a 20-something-year-old child who's a little lost, maybe this will give you hope because they're just learning and picking up threads. They haven't woven it together yet, but soon it could be what you happen to you. Is like these moments spark something in you, and then you took the reins and you created something really incredible. I also want to give you a personal shout out because I've now witnessed you in that sort of role of being in charge, and you're a very good at that role. There's a quantifiable thing. It's kind of hard to name in a way, but it's because this piece you just said about really witnessing each person and wanting their best. And so even when there are some mistakes made or miscommunication or something goes a little off, you're like super gracious about it in this public space. And I just think this allows people to feel like they can try, and it allows them to admit when something went a little bit wrong, because then they can own up to it and it'll get fixed a lot quicker. It's a great culture. And I think a lot of times when bosses are trying too hard to kind of rein things in, people get scared and then they don't admit failure, and then things go from bad to worse. So it's very cool to witness. I'm only in your meetings a few times a year, but again, as an outsider who bounces around to a lot of companies, it's cool to see you do this and to hear a little of the why you are who you are, what's making you tick. We're about to get to my favorite wrap-up question. At first, we're going to hear a quick word from our sponsor. Favorite wrap-up question. So you and I are going to stay in touch. That's a given. I'm so excited to keep supporting your organization in these summits. But let's say it's a year from now and I'm like, whoa, Robert, it's been a year since I interviewed you. I'm going to want to ask you, what's happened this past year? Like, what are the highlights? So another way of asking this is, what are you most looking forward to in the year ahead?
I have a huge vision, and that is to democratize success for all aspiring CEOs. Could be entrepreneurs, want to be a CEO. And I'm going to say that the goal is once you hit 10 million, then you've aspired them. And what I want to do is just share all this content from all these CEOs so they could all learn from the best about success. That's the path that I hope I am on 1 year from now, Robbie.
I love that. It's at the top of your website as well. Your whole idea about everyone should have access to success. You have such a tremendous amount of content you've created. You're continuously adding to that in multiple mediums and formats. It's really cool. I'm excited to be part of that and to keep supporting you and to celebrate you as you keep hitting these new milestones with your team. How can people find you and follow your work?
The website is www.theceoforumgroup.com, or the shorthand is just ceoshow.com.
Great. I'm also going to put a link in the show notes to your LinkedIn and to the Transformative CEO Summit directly, as well as to the book that you co-wrote and the other books that we mentioned here and other people we mentioned here. The show notes will be available at ontheschmooze.com. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been a really fun conversation.
Great being with you, Robbie, and great being with your audience.